Hello, everyone, and welcome to Those Who Give a Damn podcast. I am super, super excited today. Today we have Dr. Beckford, and I am so excited to have you on to talk about some hot topics, right? So I really want to jump right into it, right? I like to start the podcast off so that my audience can really get to know who we're talking to. So before we get into the policy, before people, know more about your work, I really want you to kind of talk to my audience about how did you get to where you are today, your lived experiences. I always believe that people lived experiences shape them to be who they are. Before we jump into hot topics, right? I want people to just get to know you.
Absolutely. So, peace and blessings, Dr. Malone. It is always a pleasure to be in conversation with you, and I'm blessed to be on your platform. I'm motivated by a number of things. One is faith. I believe that God has allowed myself and it allows each of us to have the experiences that we have from early on, and they maturate into experiences that we have as adults, as doing whatever work that we are to do in the world. I move because of what I've lived through. I am motivated in terms of work by what I see, by what I hear in community, and just the desire to give back. I consider myself to be a servant leader, and I live by the quote, "By any means necessary" from Malcolm X. I get in where I fit in. Whatever I got to do to get it done, I'm more than happy to. Whether it is giving speeches, or writing policy, or folding chairs. Nothing is too big or too small for me. That's kind of like how I live my life coming up in church and in community, and that's kind of what I bring to my work now.
Absolutely. And you've been in community. And my first question for you, and not necessarily even a question, but it's a complete the sentence for me because I feel like you are one of the ones who can speak to this as it relates to our young people around Washington, D.C. I want you to complete the sentence for me. Black youth are not the problem. The real problem is
White supremacy and
unpack
facets
it.
of white supremacy, right? And so the problem is the system. We Black youth operate within a system that was not built for them. It was not built for their advancement, but was in fact arguably, one can say, built for their dissolvement. Like when you look at the data, Black youth are 5 times more likely than others to be incarcerated. Black youth represent approximately 15% of the youth total population, but account for over 35% of arrests, right? Black youth are 19 times more likely to be cited for curfew violations than white youth, and all of these things aren't because Black youth are somehow just inherently criminal, but it's because there's a system and policies that are intentionally created to hold them back, to hold them down. You look at like policies like the youth curfew in DC, and how that is being institutionalized and enforced. You notice this in areas that are heavily gentrified, like Ward 6, for example, right? Where they're targeting youth and they're harassing youth and arresting them. That's happening because of a policy that was perpetuated by a system that really, I would argue, is antagonistic.
Now, how do we fix that system?
Yeah, so our approach has to be multi-pronged, right? So you fix the system by first acknowledging the flaws and the problems that exist within the system, right? Many of our lawmakers and policy stakeholders are rather they they're intentionally ignorant of the problem that exists. They're also, in my opinion, very skilled at kind of, I guess, gaslighting the public to thinking, the problem is not the system, but is in fact these young people, right? And so we as citizens, we as advocates, we have to hold those policymakers, those lawmakers accountable to the realities that exist for our young people, because in spite of these type of types of policies, there's also other very good data that shows like the problem is not the youth, but it's the system. So we have to hold policymakers accountable. We have to take control of like the stories in the media and like kind of how they talk about the youth and be more proactive in sharing positive, stories and narratives about them. And then finally, we have to give them, things to do, and we have to ensure that like the system, has to, and us as voters that participate in upholding or bringing down that system, we have to call for interventions. We have to call for things like after school programs. We have to call for better instruction. We have to call for spaces, athletic spaces, gathering spaces where young people can gather and just be. These are the type of things that are going to be paramount to address to hold the system accountable and address many of the problems that young people face today.
Absolutely. And as we talk about the political landscape that we are about to enter into here in Washington, D.C., we are entering into a mayoral race where we will be electing the next mayor of the District of Columbia. This is at the top of mind for many voters. As voters are going to the poll in the next week or so, right? June in a couple weeks,
Yeah.
June 18th here in D.C. And particularly, what would you say the next mayor of DC needs to do policy-wise to move the needle on the issue of youth in our city and making sure that they have something to do, not necessarily something to do, but making sure that there is a safe haven for young people here in the District of Columbia?
Absolutely. That's a brilliant question, my brother. That's why I always love to engage in conversation with you. You asked the right questions. I wish this question was elevated more in public discourse. But in order to provide for the youth in this moment, what our mayoral candidates and council candidates, what they really need to be doing right now, and then after they're elected, is engaging with community advocates, engaging with those who are on the ground, who are developing and running after school programs, for example, those who are running youth coalitions, youth themselves, and not just in a way that's kind of like, oh, we'll invite you to this council meeting for 5, 10 minutes to say what you have to say, right? But like, making sure that youth are a part of the co design of their has to be engagement with those who are actually doing the work. You can't provide an adequate solution if you are misdiagnosing the problem. And so often we are misdiagnosing the problem because we're not engaging the right folk. Rather, are oftentimes when it comes to youth in particular, we're running off of media fear. You know what I mean? We're running off of like propaganda of like
Absolutely.
it's ridiculous. It's like and it's annoying for me because as a practitioner, you see like these narratives that are often in the media, there's such schism with the realities of like what's actually happening. Contrary to what you would see on the DC news, for example, like instances of youth violence and youth crime are drastically down, right?
Great.
So like that's the data. That's what the data shows. And the data also shows that if you institute, intervention programs, violence intervention programs, which DC has, serving youth and adults, for example, when you have, when communities have parks, clean parks, when, students have access to, participating in engaging in athletic facilities, for example, that, their outcomes are better. Things like crime are reduced, academic outcomes are improved. So, yeah, but we know that as advocates, we know that that's
Absolutely.
why we do the work that we do, right? And so I
Right.
think why important for that to be held top of mind. But that's a brilliant question, Doctor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other point that I want to talk about too is I am actually working on a documentary now that talks about the other story of Washington, D.C. So people come to Washington and they see the Capitol, they see the White House, but they don't necessarily see the parts of D.C. where we live and where we work and we go to school and we do all these things in a city, right? And just because the White House is here and just because Capitol Hill is here, that tends to be sometimes the only thing people think about. But in DC, we are seeing native Washingtonians being priced out of Washington. We're seeing elderlies that are not able to live in their houses, stay in their houses for the mobility reasons. Rent is going up. We have a displaced federal workplace that's happening across the District of Columbia. All the while, gentrification is really just picking up and at a high speed. How does gentrification of communities really connect to the way that Black youth or policed in public spaces? How do you believe that that is connected, right? Because we're seeing it in one part of the city, right? So it's almost evidence. But how is that connected? And what is the solution to that as we think about the new leadership that's going to be seated here in Washington in city government? How is that connected?
That's such an important question, Dr. Malone. Thank you for asking it. And again, that is a question I hope in the coming weeks that the mayoral candidates and the council candidates do in fact engage. There is a strong correlation between gentrification and the rapidly changing demographics of neighborhoods and housing opportunity and policing of youth and adults. So, for example, in 1970, DC's Black population was about 71%. Today, it's about 43%. DC is considered to be, by and large, the most gentrified city in the United States. Displacement is far and wide across the wards, but notably in wards like Ward 6, where Navy Yard area, where I live, where, you know, you actually are seeing a lot of that aggressive policing of not just youth, but adults as well. In 2000, for example, the year 2000, Navy Yard was a predominantly, Black neighborhood. And in terms of policing, it looked very different than what does now. Like now, Navy Yard is a predominantly white area. A lot of folk have been priced out into, from, that particular ward to across the river. So wards, it's ironic because a lot of the displaced folk and a lot of the displaced youth, a lot of the youth that are policed in that ward rather, and they're coming back to their communities, one could argue, like, right? They had roots, they had family that had lived there for generations and generations, were priced out. They go to set Ward 7 and Ward 8. They come back to their communities to engage in the space that is, available, and they find themselves, being, harassed by police as a consequence of, this, policies like the curfew. Again, it's not just youth, but it's adults as well that are, experiencing the profiling. Because think about it, how do you know, like, how do you discern, someone's 18 or below, especially, somebody who doesn't have adequate equity training and somebody I could see as a
Right.
13-year-old, you know what I mean, could look very different, to an untrained officer in that way, right? Think about the story that happened last month. There was a young woman who was dragged off her bike. You could hear cops in the background kind of saying, making these abstract threats to her and others around, like, I'm going to get you, like, that's what happens, things to that effect. That was a grown woman. That was not even a
Right.
child, right? And like,
Right.
I myself have witnessed, youth be Black youth, one with special needs, in fact, be harassed by an officer in that area. And so, when white folk come to communities like Navy Yard and other places, you notice that the policing becomes more aggressive and more targeted.
Hmm.
And in terms of a policy solution, first and foremost, we just have to have the conversation. I so appreciate you bringing that point up. I've been trying to run my mouth to make this connection because it's like, y'all don't understand. Gentrification is
Absolutely.
it's a criminal justice issue. It's a police brutality issue. It's a housing issue for sure. It's a public health issue. You know, so like we do have to just start having conversations where we're making connections between like displacement and like the chain, the found or continued realities of Washingtonians. And I think then we must then translate that conversation into policies where, for example, we're ensuring that people can pay rent, that people are not displaced, that there are programs to help people, especially in this economy, when they're down and out. so that they aren't displaced.
Absolutely. And so I want to jump now to public education, right? And public degrees. We were taught, Doc, that we go to school, we do good, we, make sure that we do the right thing, and we go get all these degrees and we qualify ourselves, we get certificates, we do all these different things. But it is still hard as hell for Black men in America, and particularly in academics, to really make it thrive and be successful. And a lot of people isn't talking about this. I'm fresh out of my PhD program, 2 years. I think you're what, 2 years as well. And when we think about historical Black colleges and universities, I'm gonna be honest. I've been to two HBCU graduations this year, and I'm starting to see less and less Black male professors. And we can't say that we don't have them. We have them. They're
Yeah.
not hiring us, right?
Yes.
And so I really want to talk about this because it just blows my mind. When I was at a historical Black college and university in Mississippi, both for my undergraduate and graduate degrees, I had Black professors, hand down. Okay, Black professors, Black mentors. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have diverse ideas and people to be employed at our universities, but when I'm looking out at a commencement and I don't see a lot of faculty, and the faculty is becoming less and less Black or less and less Black males, there's an issue. And we got to talk about it. We got to talk about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My guy, you are on fire today. This is a phenomenon that is too underscored, in conversations of higher education. You are absolutely correct in identifying the true problem because we oftentimes like to talk about Black men in deficit. Like, oh, they're just not applying, or, oh, no, where are they? Where are they? They're here. We're
We're
here.
here.
We've been
We're
here,
here.
right? We are applying. We are going through these rigorous programs. Oh, do in fact complete them, when we are admitted, but we're not honored, or we're not revered, as a demographic, as a group, for our potential to contribute to the academy. And I say, and what that's reflected in the fact that Black men represent less than 3% of full-time faculty at US universities. I'll say this with absolute humility. I hold a degree from Yale University, graduated with 3.7. I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a 4.0 in an education program. Went to the University of Cambridge, earned a first on my dissertation. Graduated from Vanderbilt University with a 3.98 GPA and a highly esteemed dissertation project coming out of that program. I have applied for multiple positions, adjunct positions in higher education, despite my accolades, despite my professional experiences working at the White House, working in senior leadership in the nonprofit space, founding nonprofits. I have not gotten a single offer. I don't even think I've gotten maybe one interview, applying to such roles, right? And I don't mean to be in self too indulgent, but I think like, damn,
Right.
and it is something I'm looking at kind of secondarily. I'm haphazardly kind of applying to these things, but it's also like, damn, if I
Yeah.
can't get this role with my experience, and what is it like for the rest of us? And then you look at the landscape of like those who do get in, those whose academic work, is esteemed, and it's sad, right? Because Black men, when we are, seeking positions in academia, we are driven by mission. We are driven by service to community. So much of what we bring to the academy, when you look at our research interests, the research we pursue, it is to advance the plight of Black men, Black boys, and Black people. By and large, it is action driven, and but it's sad that that is oftentimes in exchange. And I'm not saying like other projects, like projects of cultural effect, or study of art, or anything is anything of that is should be devalued, but you know it is oftentimes the projects from white folk that don't have a mission, or have what I would say a purpose behind it, that are often esteemed, as a consequence um, of not admitting, Black men, and not just admitting Black men into programs, but elevating them in academia. It's a serious problem that has to be
Absolutely.
addressed. And I feel like, some of us, I wouldn't be mad if somebody pulled a Dr. Cheyenne Bryant, out they had and just be like, what point? I might as well, because y'all they're not putting me through the doors, But no, in all seriousness, it's a problem.
Yeah, it is a big problem. And we know that the research shows that when African American males see themselves in the classroom, they are more prone to go out into society and be more productive. And we know that, right? They need to see Black men like ourselves in the classroom. And it's something that we got to continue to talk about. I want you to finish this sentence for me. Black men in academics are invited into the room, but they're not always allowed to.
They're not always allowed to be themselves, and they're not always allowed to challenge. And what I mean by that is my research as an academic looks at the experiences of Black men who function in senior leadership of education nonprofits. I did a mixed studies project, meaning I did interviews. There was a qualitative aspect of it, but then there was also a quantitative aspect via surveys and data analysis. And what my research found is that these Black men who are senior leaders, of education nonprofits, they uh, often challenged when they are most challenged when they speak up. So even in leadership capacities, they are challenged when they like give, sometimes it's a certain tone or tenor, right? You know what I mean? Like if
Right.
for example, like I'm from where I'm from, and I have to like sometimes like I have to walk this line of like, okay, I can't scare this white woman, so I may have to like soften my voice or smile a little bit. I can't be, upset or angry, because which is a real human emotion, but because if I do, in an academic space or like in the context of my research, for example, it scares people, or it
Correct.
makes you a threat, or it makes you inefficient, right? And so we as Black men, we often have to like teeter this line, a very thin line of performance, of strategy. I think that is especially true for Black men who are in the academy. There's a good homie of mine who's like, he's a professor, in the Northeast, and he a hood dude. He's a hood dude from Florida. Like he speak the way he speak. It is what it is. He's not code switching. And the stories I've heard from this brother of like, of microaggressions and aggressions of, folk within that
Oh, absolutely.
academic space, asking him, if he's okay, or can he like smile or do these different things, where he's like, that's not me, and that's not like and I'm not going to rob myself of my full expression of humanity. So, that's just a challenge that we face in the academy and education. I think in all spaces, right? Is like being able to be our authentic selves and being able to be human, that have and express a wide range of emotions.
Absolutely. And it's crazy because even in Black spaces, I know from my own experiences, what you're saying is to be true. They want you to shrink, or they don't want you to be as bold and as courageous. And I'm like, what the hell? All
Right.
found, all ancestors, right? The
Right.
only reason why we have the ability to be at historical Black colleges and university is because of ancestors and people like Congressman John Lewis and Fannie Lou Hamer. And so I'd be damned if I'm gonna sit in spaces and shrink
Right.
myself and not speak truth to power. And so if speaking truth to power causes a door to be closed in my face, then Doc, I'm okay with it being closed
Right.
because it wasn't
Close
for
it.
me. Because we were founded upon the right of speaking up and to speaking out. And when we see something that is not right, that is not just, we have to say something. And I think the problem with this new generation is they don't have professors like us, they don't have leaders like us who are in the classroom teaching them the values and the history that we have went through as a people, and why it's important to use your
Absolutely.
voice and to speak out and etc. So what you're saying is so absolutely true.
And you know what?
And
They
that's
don't want us there. You know what I mean? Like that's a part of it. It is a part of it's by design. The system is, I would argue, is functioning as it should. When you bring bold, dynamic voices into the academic space, spaces, it's going to result in different cultures, different policies at those institutions, different types of research being elevated, different types of conversations, and a different type of responsibility. And I would argue that many of these institutions, they don't want that they're not ready for that. and or they're just not talking or thinking about it. Because I do think, for example, outside of predominantly white institutions, that there are HBCUs, for example, that are having conversations of that it's somewhat like they've acknowledged, like, okay, like,
Some, somewhat.
representation isn't there, right? But then they're
Yeah,
also aren't having conversations about, well, do we have fellowship programs, to recruit? When you look at for example, the type of fellowship programs that exist across colleges, name fellowship programs that are explicit to Black men. You
correct.
could see it for every other type of demographic. But when you talk about Black men, name them. There's one at McArey, the medical school, which is they to recruit high school students to go through the pipeline to medical school, right? I know NYU had a public policy program for Black men at the master's level. What else is there? I mean, you got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of institutions, and there's nothing
Absolutely.
existing, right? So it's also like, okay, like, what are you doing, as an institution to solve the problem? And also, like, we again, I think institutions, and I think a greater society, we talk about Black men as in deficit ways, right? But we don't. But if we are to embrace, like, the our assets and our strengths, and there's a book by Dr. Ivory Tolson about I think it's called Bad Stats or Bad Data. Shit changed my life, the book, because it provides an counter data driven narrative and argument to basically support, what we're talking about now, which is, recruiting and sustaining and supporting Black men, and Black people. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my honest opinion, this is my opinion and not yours, but in my honest opinion, as a three-time HBCU graduate with a family legacy of historical Black colleges and university graduates, I feel like HBCUs are too quiet in this moment that we're in.
Oh yeah.
We were founded on the ability to get in trouble, as Congressman John Lewis say, in necessary trouble. And to not see a convening of them, the leadership of the way that they need to be in this time and in this hour is quite troubling, and it's signaling a message to the students in which are at those institutions. But one of the most beautiful things that I do like about the era that we're in now, we even saw that at South Carolina State University when they brought in the commencement
Well,
speaker that the students did not want. That is very tone deaf, but that is an example of what we just talked about. But the students also had enough within them to say, no, this is not going to happen, right? And so a lot of times as we see change always happen from the outside, right? And so that lets us see that even though students are their main stakeholders, they were outsiders at that point, right?
right.
Because they didn't want the commencement speaker, which led me to know that they wasn't at the table in that decision. But change always comes from the outside. And particularly, it's going to be interesting as the months and days are coming ahead of the midterms and the different things that are happening in this country. It's going to be very interesting to see how all of these ecosystems either come together for change or collapse or go in corners. And it will be interesting to see who rise up in this occasion to really make a difference and to really speak to that. Now, Doc, a lot of this podcast is about politics, right? And so I saw one of your posts that you made about what happened in Texas with Jasmine Crockett. Do you mind talking to us about it before we close out today? I couldn't let you come on without talking about it because I'm sure you probably got smoked that night. I didn't go into your comment session, but walk us through your take on the Jasmine Crockett race, which I believe needs to be a take for Democrats moving forward ahead of the midterms in the 2028.
Absolutely happy to talk about that. I knew you was gonna come with something. So yeah, I'll preface by saying the dialogue was actually a very healthy one. If you, my back and forth with folk in the comments of it. But basically what I said was, respect and, admire, Jasmine Crockett. Had the opportunity to engage with her a few times and folk in her office. I think she's amazing. And I think she, has contributed so much to this moment. But the reality is that she, as a candidate, was not, in my opinion, held, I wouldn't even say accountable, but responsible for to advance politically. And what I mean by that is that we kind of allow some of our rising stars to not necessarily speak to politics and policies that are explicit to our advancement as Black folk or the advancement of those who are historically marginalized at large, right? And so you think about the absent commentary of her to the Palestinian cause, for example, and look at that in an alignment to the candidate,
Mhm.
a white guy who's speaking on these things and it is a little bit more explicit to issues affecting us. That's worrisome and that's problematic. And my post was basically describing that and calling us out, holding us accountable to say, listen, I know we want to, there's this brilliant black woman. She's dynamic. She's great, but we got to do more than say, okay, sis, like, yes, talking points. Okay, you cussed them out. It's like, no, that's not enough. And
Right.
we are getting our asses handed to us time and time again because we are surface level. I think we are neoliberal in our approach. I would especially say that to what's supposed to be the progressive slant. I recognize we have conservatives and moderates, amongst us as black folk. Not so much them too, but not so much of them. But it's those who are like, oh, I'm pushing for progress. Like, if you're pushing for progress, hold her responsible. And until you do, we will have outcomes as such because we can look at data and we can look at like what moves and drives people to vote the way they vote in certain bases, notably black men, youth, younger voters, for example, these very particular bases. You have to speak to certain things. The Palestinian cause is not something you can overlook, right? The economy is not something you can overlook. Food, housing, these
Mhm.
very basic things. These are not things you can overlook and not speak about and be explicit about. So we have to hold people like her accountable. A few folk from that Facebook post, they were kind of like explain more. There's going to be some, and I say this with humility. I'm a very eloquent writer. I love to write, and so it was, it's a Facebook post, but it was a very detailed. It was a thesis, right? Like, let's really look at this, right? And
Right.
so the engagement was like, some questions, and I answered them, and here's my thing, I'm not necessarily a contrarian. Like, I don't try to like antagonize or just or piss people off. But I do think that. But I am somebody who can make connections that can you know connect the dots and can see a little bit beyond the surface to say like, okay, we actually need to talk about this. Okay, we actually need to call this out. Okay, we actually need to be embracing of nuance as
Mhm.
a people. But yeah, that was that. I knew you was gonna come up on here with something. That was light work though, because I said a lot more. So this could have been.
I really appreciate you coming on today. And we're going to have to do more of these, especially with you here in DC. I'm actually getting ready for a live podcast with a group of panelists. So I'm definitely going to bring you back. Before you close out today, I've been asking all of the guests, all my DC guests, which is important. Why do you give a damn?
Why do I give a damn? Woo. And I was expecting that question. I give a damn because it's my responsibility. I'm here. I've been positioned to serve as an advocate. I have lived a life of trials and tribulations and victory. I am somebody who is now, knowledgeable, who is resourced, who has a skill set to make things better for us. And that's what I'm going to do. I started this podcast or conversation, Dr. Malone, by saying, I'm somebody who operates on by any means necessary. Whatever I got to do, whatever tool, whatever strategy I got to employ, I will employ it because, our advancement, is contingent upon folk like us, leaning into that responsibility. All of us really leaning into,
Mhm.
a responsibility to give to the collective. And that could be anything from, cooking a meal for a neighbor who is sick and shut in, for a time, to giving drives to people to the polls, to having debates and arguments, with folk and pushing dialogue to, being out there in the streets and doing, direct support and explicit work. I give a damn because I gotta give a damn. I gotta give a damn. We gotta give a damn. It's
Absolutely.
crazy not to. Shoot, you know how high gas is? Somebody got to give a damn. Shoot.
I appreciate you so much. I really do. And thank you for your work. I want you to tell my audience how to get in contact with you for speaking engagements and to bring you in for consulting work, etc. Tell the people how to get in contact with you.
Yes, absolutely. So feel free to connect and follow me on LinkedIn, Dr. Kevin Beckford. I'm also on Facebook if you'd like. My email I can provide to you. It's you can reach me at Kevin at pretrial, pretrial.org. I'm a co-founder of a nonprofit, the Hustlers Guild. Definitely follow us across our platforms at the Hustlers Guild on all social media platforms as well, where you can see the great work that youth are doing in DC and across the country, contrary to the narratives that are being spouted by some of these policymakers and in the news. But yeah, definitely reach out to me. I'm always here to have conversations. I consult with, in addition to do my nonprofit work, I consult with school districts. I consult with nonprofits on topics regarding fundraising, board management, nonprofit governance, and all the things nonprofit. So yeah, reach out.
Absolutely. And for all my HBCU people, he's open to coming to your university as well. So
I
we're
am.
going to put that out there too. Thank you so much, brother. From one brother to the next, I just want to say I'm so very proud of you, the work that you're doing across this country, and the best is yet to come. And so thank you for your service and thank you for your work.
Thank you, my brother. I appreciate it. Blessings to you.
Thank you.